and welcome to the Rankin Report for Sunday, June the 12th, 2022. From the book of Job, the oldest book in the Bible, as we understand it, chapter 12, verse 23. He, meaning God, makes the nations great, then destroys them. He enlarges the nations, then leads them away. In last week's post, I gave the general outline for the reestablishment of the order of things, or how a nation operates once a crisis such as this nation currently finds itself in has passed. This idea, this abstract, if you will, comes from the books of Ezra and Nehemiah in the Old Testament, describing the return of the exiles to the Promised Land and the city of Jerusalem from 70 years of exile in Babylon. Now, in order to better understand what Scripture is talking about, we have to contrast two models of nations, one general and secular, the other biblical. And over all that, we have to understand that God works in the courses of nations, as referenced from the passage in Job we just read, and it's not always in that order, raising them up and bringing them down as he sees fit for his purposes. Because of this, God can intervene anytime he wishes and disrupt the cycle, or perhaps more accurately, jump a nation from one cycle to another. We first need to examine the general cycle of nations, sometimes called the cycle of civilizations, which was first penned by Sir Alex Fraser Tytler, who lived from 1747 to 1813. Sir Alex was a historian, judge, lawyer, writer, and professor of universal history and Greek and Roman antiquities at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. In his cycle, Sir Alex sets the pattern this way, beginning with bondage, moving to spiritual faith, from faith to great courage, courage to liberty, liberty to abundance, abundance to selfishness, selfishness to complacency, complacency to apathy, apathy to dependency, and then finally back to bondage. Now, the bondage can come from either within the nation or without of the nation. Either a nation can be dominated and ruled over by another nation, a stronger nation, or it can be under the bondage of its own people who turn wicked in their rule over the nation. Now, in the case of the latter, national weakness caused by wicked internal rule can lead to domination by another nation, which sees an opportunity for gain at the expense of the weaker nation. This can be direct or indirect. The stronger nation can use its military to invade and assume control over the weaker, or it can simply exert influence over the leader of a weaker nation, or the leaders, if there is more than one, through manipulation of circumstances or outright blackmail. Let's say they've got something on somebody, and make the weaker nation do the bidding of the stronger. You see this a lot in the Old Testament, as Israel and Judah, and then finally Judah, became like every other nation around them instead of the light that God intended Israel to be. Tytler's cycle applies to nations on a general basis. The nation is established and operates on its own with no influence or covenant with God. Even if the founders of the nation may have had legitimate, defensible, perhaps even righteous reasons for the nation's existence, without following through with the one who Benjamin Franklin called that powerful friend, the sin nature of humans will eventually override all nobler considerations and self will take over. It's the same old story throughout history, as English historian Lord Acton, 1834 to 1902, wrote, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." This is where the United States of America is right now. Those who know the history of this nation know that it began with freeing itself from the bondage of the tyranny of rule by men, and set itself up as rule by laws. And these laws were influenced by the Bible. People who put up memes saying, there's no, separation of church and state, which is not in the Constitution or the Declaration. And it was never supposed to be a church ruling over everything. No, but the church influenced the people who ran the nation. Many, though not all of us, now find ourselves in the 9th stage of this process. We have long passed the stages of selfishness, complacency, and apathy, and we are now, many of us, are now in dependency on the government. Too many of us rely on government to provide essential services that once upon a time we provided for ourselves. You may remember watching old westerns or stories set during the Great Depression, where people refused to take help from the government, scorning them as charity or, quote, handouts, unquote. In these tales, such people were depicted as prideful and stubborn, people held up as examples of what not to be, especially if they had families. In 2002, a movie was released entitled The Emperor's Club, about a teacher of antiquities at an upscale college prep school dedicated to instilling higher virtues and principles in his students so that they would become better adults and better citizens. A new student was given him, the son of a United States senator. The boy had a difficult relationship with his father and a rather rebellious streak, and opposed the teacher in many ways. When speaking to his father, the teacher spoke of the values the school strives to mold in its students. The father, however, told the teacher flat out that his job was to teach him his times tables, why the world is round, who killed who, when, and where. Molding the son's character was the father's responsibility, which to a degree is true, except in this film, of course, he was held up as a bad example because he was doing a rotten job of it. Don't get me wrong, I am by no means downplaying the role of teachers in our society, nor saying education is hardly essential. The founders of this nation were educated men, and I myself am a teacher, and it would certainly be hypocritical of me to say the profession is unnecessary. But as we now are realizing, we as a people have been manipulated by Hollywood and by what teachers themselves have been taught for generations, and not always for the better. What if most people who we would call self-reliant or self-sufficient knew that if you turn over more of the things of this life from your own hand to the state, the closer you draw to the final stage of the cycle, which is a return to bondage? There's an emphasis now on building up trade schools again, saying that college is not necessarily for everybody, which is true. It might not be a bad idea to do both in some ways. Sir Alex's cycle is the fate of nations that have nothing to do with God. But there is good news. God is able in all this to step into the middle of the cycle, alter it, change its course, interrupt it, or break it as needed in the life of a nation that has sought him out from its foundation. It has happened before with both ancient and modern Israel, and it has happened with the United States, and can happen again. And we will see how that works next week. That's the Rankin Report for Sunday, June the 12th, 2022. God bless you. Have a great day.